This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, and then their tool will provide options from other companies, so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Without the ones like you, who work tirelessly to keep things running, everything would suddenly stop. Hospitals, factories, schools, and power plants, they all depend on you. No matter the weather, emergency, or time of day, you're the ones who get it done. At Grainger, we're here for you with professional-grade industrial supplies. Count on real-time product availability and fast delivery. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Right now, Donald Trump is overseeing what I think can only be described as the final season of The Apprentice. It's official. Trump has become the Republican Party's nominee for president, which means the next question is, who is willing to share a ticket with this guy?
Tremendous people, some of the most talented people, they want to come into this administration, so we'll see what happens.
Last week, Trump went on Newsmax to speculate wildly about all sorts of things, including who he would name as his second in command.
Vice President, are you any closer? Have you ruled anybody out?
Yeah, I probably have a couple of people that you may know very well.
Listening, I had to admit I had some grudging respect for the way Trump can build anticipation by saying nothing at all, really.
As a vice president.
Is there a formal process underway right now?
No, it's a formal process. It's in my brain.
This process would be a lot for any one person to handle. There are so many possible candidates. I don't even think I could recite their names in one breath, but I'll try. There's Tim Scott, Elise Stefanik, Kristi Noem, Sarah Sanders, Joni Ernst, J.D. Vance, Kari Lake, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis. I am not even finished, but you get the idea. Benjy Sarlin from over at Semafor says Trump seems to be working his way through this list the way he always does. He's workshopping candidates in public.
There was like this great NBC story the other day about him going up to like random Mar-a-Lago members and being like, does Tim Scott seem too extreme on abortion? 6 weeks. Does that seem like too little time? Like that's how he thinks through a lot of problems.
It strikes me that Trump has done this before, picked a vice president. And the last time he waited until right before the Republican convention to make his announcement. How much do you know about the story of how Mike Pence became Trump's first VP pick?
We do have a fairly decent picture. This was a head versus heart decision in many ways. And Mike Pence was very much like the sensible party man pick, who people were telling him he needed because that offset his biggest vulnerability, which is that he was seen as like this completely insane wild man where like no one knew what to expect.
There's a story that underlines just how random Mike Pence's selection was in 2016. It involves Trump's plane getting a flat tire in Indianapolis a little bit before the Republican Party convention. That gave Pence the time to woo Trump with dinner and brunch. It gave him an edge. Of course, Pence might have regretted that edge later. And now, everyone who is vying to be Pence's successor, well, they see how things went down with the last guy.
This is a completely bizarre process for a few different reasons. One of which is that Trump assembled a mob that tried to kill his previous vice president.
That's a pretty high bar to be like, this is what happened last time. Yeah, I still want that job.
Yeah, I mean, the odds are decent that if Trump loses his election, he might serve jail time for the things he asked his previous vice president to do. That is what he is being indicted over. So it's like, just to put things in perspective, like this is not a normal job.
Today on the show, Republican Veepstakes and why they are about to get weird. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Discover. When it comes to your finances, Discover wants you to know they are the credit card that is always there for you. With 24/7 U.S.-based live customer service, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We are talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. I want to start with an admission. There are so many possible people in the running for Trump's VP, and Trump himself is so indecisive that it's pretty hard to do a show that is guaranteed to answer every question about who might be in the running and why. That said, Benjy Sarlin, he makes a pretty strong case for talking about this pick now anyway.
So it may seem like not the biggest deal as pick, because on a political level, it's Trump. People have extremely strong, opinions about Trump right now. He's been running for president continuously now for nearly a decade. People know what he is at this point. How much is some backbenching, congressman or congresswoman he chooses going to influence anyone's opinion on him? I don't think that much. But another way to look at this is that this is actually one of the most important vice presidential choices, I think, in memory. Incredibly important.
Why do you say that?
For a couple of reasons. One is the aforementioned reason, which is that he tried to commit what the federal government alleges are extreme crimes using his previous vice president. But more importantly, Trump is pulling a Grover Cleveland right now. He's already been president and he's running for president again, which means if he wins, he will be a lame duck immediately, just day one. And that the presumptive next nominee, the front runner, will be who he picks as vice president. From day one, everyone's already going to be talking about the 2028 cycle, and they are going to be front and center with that. The entire party has been mostly defined as a cult of personality around Trump since he won in 2016. And it has become increasingly so since then. You're seeing even just this cycle quietly down ballot, Trump-aligned candidates are winning their races everywhere. The party is continuing to get more and more Trumpy. But what does Trumpy mean? Trump is famously very malleable on policy. People have tried to distill Trumpism into some kind of ideological set of rules, but a lot of it is just driven by his personality and the extreme faith that his supporters place in him personally. And for that reason, it's not totally clear what the party will look like after him.
So you see this pick as a crystal ball?
Yeah, possibly. If he picks someone who is someone who only would have been elected in the Trump era, whose entire political persona is defined by Trump, by supporting him, by going all in on especially his efforts to overturn the election, who is very invested in stopping people who are pre-Trump or seen as insufficiently pro-Trump from getting traction. If he picks one of them, then the entire next, future of the party is going to be defined about whether they can continue that legacy. So this really is a crossroads pick, even if it's not fully appreciated in the moment, I think.
Okay, you've made the case for why we should pay attention to this. And I want to talk about who the potential VP picks are. And there are a whole lot of them because it's such early days right now. So I came up with a few categories for us to run through and talk about, if you're okay with that. My first category, I call it the runners up. These are the people who ran for president themselves and lost to Trump. And it's just a tried and true way to get on the eventual ballot as vice president. But even in this category, I feel like there's subcategories, and I call them the total suck-ups and the not quite suck-ups. So maybe let's start with the total suck-ups in the runner-up category here. I put Tim Scott and Vivek Ramaswamy in that category. Agree or disagree?
They are definitely the current league leaders in that category, I'd say. Yeah, that would probably be fair to say.
What makes them suck-ups? What makes what puts them in this category?
Well, Vivek Ramaswamy was kind of an odd candidacy in that he was like a suck up from the start, even while he was running against Donald Trump.
Yeah, he ran as like the future of America first. He said he would pardon Trump if he was elected. He was like Trumpier than Trump kind of thing.
I would go further than Trump in advancing that America first agenda.
Yeah, I mean, he was so Trumpy to the point that a lot of, his critics within the party would grumble that they thought he was basically like a stalking horse candidate to help Trump, divide the vote or something. And that, eventually he would endorse him as he did. Because his whole idea was that like Trump's the greatest president ever. His project was sort of, he wouldn't describe it this way, but this is very much what he was doing, trying to create a Trumpism without Trump. Like, what if we came up with like Trump's instincts and turned them into a set of rules? What would that rule book look like? And then I will just institute that rule book. Yes.
Yeah. And then you have Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina. And he's interesting to me because you're seeing him do all these things that you would do if you wanted to be the vice presidential candidate. He announced an engagement. He'd been single for a long time. He is sort of doing this thing when he maneuvers around the halls of Congress where he's like not making comments on things, even though he's been very outspoken in his role as senator until now. Like, how else are you seeing him sort of put himself out there in this very obvious way?
So let me read a quote from Tim Scott. He was on Fox News. So Trump is currently in the process of taking over the Republican National Committee.
Yes, he put his daughter-in-law in charge, basically.
Yeah, and Scott was asked about it. This was his take on Trump putting his own daughter-in-law in this job. He understands the devil's in the details.
That the devil's in the details. So he puts his brilliant daughter-in-law in charge of our RNC apparatus.
He goes on, you want the ball in the hands of the best player on the field. That player is Donald Trump. So this is like the median, like Tim Scott quote, like on a daily basis right now when anything comes up related to Trump. A big part of the job of becoming vice president to Trump is sitting there silently when Trump says things.
Yeah, just nod and smile.
Yes, that there's a lot of that going on right now. And Trump, I feel like, has been deliberately provoking Scott in this way to see how he'd react.
Hold it. How is he testing him?
So the big example there was, one, Tim Scott is universally like well-liked in the Senate. So what Trump did is bring him on stage while he was in, the height of his race against Nikki Haley.
Nikki Haley appointed Tim Scott, we should say.
Yes. And Trump started mentioning that and saying, wow, Tim Scott.
She actually appointed you, Tim? And think of it, appointed, and you're the senator of his state, and she endorsed me. You must really hate her.
And Tim Scott came on to get to the microphone to say, like,
I just love you.
No, that's
But the point is, like, Trump knows this is something that he's picking at a wound here. Like, Tim Scott is clearly not happy to be seen as someone who just stabbed in the back the person who also gave them their start, in the Senate.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the slightly less suck-uppy runners-up. I'm thinking about Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis. To me, I just feel like it's really hard to see how Trump picks them, but I wonder how you think about it.
Well, the Ron DeSantis case, let's start with. DeSantis did endorse him right out the gate, but no, he has not acted like someone who is running for this job. He is still kind of complaining about the race and like grousing about, what went wrong and how he was mistreated, when he does speak. Trump's own senior campaign staff are just like routinely dumping on DeSantis on on social media, like publicly. I do not get the impression they like him.
What about Nikki Haley? Because she stayed in the race a really long time and she won a state. She made the case for herself, basically. But do you think that matters?
So on paper, Nikki Haley is like a perfect pick for Trump in many ways, right? Like, what was her biggest appeal that whole time was with, moderate suburbanite women, especially, Trump's absolute weakest group. She had figured out a perhaps kinder, gentler way to at least talk about abortion, which is one of Trump's biggest weaknesses heading into this election.
We need to make sure that we are not putting any women in jail, anyone, the death penalty from state laws if a woman gets an abortion. Let's humanize this issue and stop demonizing this issue.
But she very pointedly has not endorsed Trump. Trump personally and also his team are like not trying to reconcile with her at all. They are still continuously dumping on her. The one reason that I would not just rule her out entirely is that, Nikki Haley has done this before.
This is in the 2016 race.
In the 2016 race, Nikki Haley compared Trump to the Emmanuel Church shooter, the white supremacist who shot black churchgoers in Charleston, and said, like, we've seen where that kind of rhetoric leads. She was like really made a moral case against Trump repeatedly throughout that. And then she joined his administration immediately. And not only that, like she was serving in a very typically like non-political position. She was the UN ambassador. And then and Trump really became to like her because she was very good on television, was a very good surrogate. And, she had a prominent speaking role at the 2020 RNC. And then she turned on him after January 6th and then immediately turned back and said, in fact, she wouldn't run for president if he ran again, and then ran against him. And then by the end sounded very resistance-y.
Talk about flip-flopping. I mean, amazing.
Yeah. And it's hard. I always say it's like people shouldn't waste too much time thinking about like the inner lives of politicians. I think it's hard to say with Haley how she deep down feels about Trump. I suspect she dislikes him for the reason she named in 2016. But the only reason I would think of her potentially coming in as a vice president is that she's flip-flopped 5 times before. And that if he called up and asked, you never know.
Okay, so we've talked about the runners-up, the people who ran against Trump this time. I have a couple more categories. Here's how I think of them. The ride or dies, the people who've been MAGA from jump and are looking for their loyalty to be rewarded. And then the converts, the people who were not MAGA from jump, but had a come to Trump moment and changed their mind. And in the ride or dies, I'd put, obviously like a Marjorie Taylor Greene wearing the MAGA hat to State of the Union. I'd put Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas now, but, known for being White House spokesperson. So this would be kind of getting the band back together. And then in the convert category, I'd put Elise Stefanik. She's a New York congresswoman who was moderate and kind of became MAGA. So what do you think of these two categories? Because I think they're different directions for Trump to go in, right?
Sure. One of the biggest differences here, another way to describe these two categories is often virtually anyone who was an elected Republican before 2016 was anti-Trump at some point.
Right.
Almost without exception. Trump did not get any major endorsements from senators or members of Congress until he almost had the nomination completely wrapped up.
So OGs versus new blood, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And by the way, this includes Mike Pence. Go back, you could look up, Mike Pence did not endorse Trump. He endorsed Cruz. And, he said things like the Muslim ban were unconstitutional and un-American at the time. Everyone found something they really disliked about Trump and then eventually converted, in some way. So a really interesting thing about a lot of the folks you named there, especially like Marjorie Taylor Greene, those are people who really got into politics because of Trump.
He's their origin story.
Yes. And this is true of so many, especially younger Republicans coming up now, is that's these are folks who might not have been in politics, were not in political roles before, and then saw him and said, that's the kind of party I'm attracted to.
After the break. How much will any of this even matter? This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So, just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Okay, talking about all these candidates, I think of a vice presidential candidate as being almost purposefully boring, and that's not what this list is. And it's funny because the last time Trump was picking a vice presidential candidate and he was looking at Mike Pence, one argument that was made was, you don't need another lightning rod at the top of the ticket. Do you think that argument still holds water?
I mean, it does make me wonder. I think it applies much less. There's arguments for various candidates here, but I don't think the argument for many of them is like, they'll be nice and boring. Like,
yeah,
they don't need that the same way. This time around, there aren't folks who are like wondering, like, can I trust Trump? I worry he won't be like Reagan-y enough. Like, that's what Nikki Haley was basically trying to run on. Like, how many of you are around? And the answer was not many. Like, the party is pretty fully converted to whatever Trump's up to these days. And to the extent social conservatives and specifically anti-abortion conservatives, like, had concerns, which is really what Mike Pence was important on, Roe versus Wade is gone. Those concerns are over. Evangelicals love Trump now. Like, there's nothing to convince people on over there anymore.
Yeah, I was gonna talk about that because last time, like, one of the qualities that really helped Mike Pence land the VP slot is that he was evangelical. He is evangelical. And it was a constituency Trump and his aides wanted to make sure they locked down. But of course, this time, it seems to me that the evangelical vote is pretty settled. Like, Trump is their pick, and they've decided we don't care about whatever else has happened that doesn't align with our values. So I guess the question for me becomes, what's the role of this VP pick? Like, what kinds of constituencies does Trump need to lock down this time, and how might that be reflected here?
Well, one is, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people close to Trump who would love him to pick a woman.
Yeah.
Like, that's at the top.
Yeah, I have a theory that Trump will feel some kind of internal pressure to pick a woman or a person of color as a running mate, basically to prove that he can, since so many accuse him of being racist and sexist. Some have called my theory crazy, but I stand by it.
Though the nature of that conversation has changed a little bit. So with women, I mean, like, this has been a theme since as soon as he showed up, like specifically suburban women, like Trump has just been toxic. And like, so much of the current Democratic coalition is built on running up these huge margins in the suburbs. Many of these voters maybe were like former Romney voters who have just fully converted to Democrats at this point. But one thing that's really changed is there are quite a few, non-white candidates who Trump could turn to.
Totally.
And the story lately is that the party under Trump has been making major gains.
Yeah, with Black voters in particular and Latino voters.
Yep. In 2020, it was big gains with Latino voters. In more recent polling, it seems like Black voters are increasingly showing more interest in Trump than they have Republican candidates in the past. Strangely, even as white nationalist great replacement talking points become more and more mainstream in Republican politics, the party's actually getting way more confident about its ability to survive and thrive in a country that is majority minority. So you could see the case for, picking someone like Tim Scott. You could make the case for saying look, maybe Trump can really make a big swing and get a whole bunch of Black voters, and this would be a big signal there.
Yeah. How do you think abortion is going to play into the selection Trump makes here?
It's going to be a huge issue. I'm not entirely sure where it's all going to end up. But to give the basics here, Trump has taken very few clear positions on abortion. And the nature of the abortion debate has changed a lot. In 2016, the big litmus test was, will you appoint judges who will overturn Roe v. Wade?
Answer, yes.
Yes, he promised to do that. He also promised to literally pick from a list that was handed to him.
Also, yes. He did that.
Yeah, and he did, and it worked. And there was the Dobbs decision, and now it's gone to states. But what we've seen, on a week by week basis is like, every week there's a national news story about some new policy consideration that really wasn't discussed that much when Roe v. Wade prevented all these bans, but now is suddenly in play. So immediately, for example, you had questions of, okay, in these states that had like a trigger law where there's no rape and incest exception, like what happens to a 10-year-old girl? Does she have to leave the state? Like if a doctor performs an abortion, will they get prosecuted? So that became an uncomfortable question right out the gate. And it's one that some of his potential VP picks have struggled with given their own state's bans. But yeah, that's just one of many examples where you're going to see him being pressed on this and it being an issue.
And do you think it'll factor into the vice presidential pick?
Yeah. So Tim Scott, for example, like he tried to pick a lane in the presidential run where he would run to Nikki Haley's right on abortion. So he's on record now in support of those 6-week bans, support of a 15-week national ban, something that Trump has kind of like hinted at, but he has not embraced yet. So picking him would mean taking all that. One of the weirdest things about Trump's image and presidency in general is that, a lot of his support in 2016 came from secular voters, especially in like the Rust Belt, who had voted Democratic recently or were independents and were not especially conservative on abortion, who liked that they did not think Trump was like a Bible thumping Mike Pence type.
Yeah. He was like a Rorschach test. Like people looked at him and saw what they wanted.
Yeah, and also it was very easy. It was extremely easy to think that like Trump's going to get rid of abortion, like this guy. So a big question this whole cycle is going to be how much we know this issue hurts Republicans. How much can you tie it to Trump? How much will voters care?
Yeah. Before we go, I want to circle back to something you said towards the beginning of our conversation. You talked about how a reason to pay attention to this vice presidential pick is that it's a signal about the future of the Republican Party. It's a crystal ball a little bit. But it strikes me that this vice presidential pick is so personal. It really comes down to what one man wants, Donald Trump. Do you think Trump cares about MAGA beyond himself?
That's one of the biggest questions, honestly, because like so far I have not seen a ton of evidence of it. I mean, like Trump he's very involved now in getting MAGA candidates elected. He's done that in races around the country. But a lot of it has been working to punish people who have, gotten on his personal bad side more than it's been like some really consistent ideological mission to like, we have to defeat all the people who, support foreign aid, say, or we have to defeat all the people who have like a slightly different position on immigration, say. It's like, it's much more in relation to Trump. I mean, I will say this, like Trump is not someone who like seems to think too much about like, what will the world say after I die? Like this is a guy who, like,
he's not thinking about his obituaries.
Yes, he's like compared to someone like Mike Pence, for example, who is like, no, like I am a lifelong member of a conservative movement and I will make decisions based on like how it affects that movement.
It's funny. So you're basically saying this guy who doesn't give a whit, like doesn't care at all about legacy is the person in charge of making like the legacy of the Republican Party at this point.
Yeah. And it's a very weird thing, his relationship to it. There was a moment where it looked like Trump was in serious danger of losing the nomination, right? Where Ron DeSantis was leading him in polls after the midterms. And there was a serious concern that if Trump were losing, he would just go third party and tank the Republican Party. Which he's threatened to do in the past. He reportedly threatened to do it after January 6th when he was in danger of being impeached by Republicans. He was threatening to do it in 2016 if he felt like the RNC was unfair to him or he lost the nomination then. And the reason is that he does not have institutional investment in the Republican Party. He is not like, it's like a third party candidate took over a party. Like they're just like renting it basically. It's so it's a very different relationship than prior nominees in either party.
Yeah, it's like it simultaneously makes this vice presidential pick, like more important and less important,
Exactly. It's just a unique situation. There's really just never been a vice presidential pick like this. So again, even if it seems like a little like boring, a sideshow, who cares? Trump is Trump. Whoever his pick is, that's a minor thing. Like, I swear, this really matters.
Benjy, Sarlin, I'm so grateful for your time and for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Mary.
Benjy Sarlin is the Washington bureau chief over at Semafor. And that's our show. If you're a fan of What Next, the best way to support our work is to join Slate Plus. Go on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. What Next is produced by Paige Osborne, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you back here next time.
Looks like you need a vacation. Enter the 5-Hour Energy Where Will the Tide Take You sweepstakes. You could win a $10,000 dream beach vacation. Imagine jet setting off to a tropical paradise, having fun in the sun, or diving at a gorgeous reef. It's up to you. No purchase necessary. Go to 5HETide.com for official rules and to enter. That's 5HETide.com. Enter today. Ends June 30th, 2024.